Welcome to Storm the Gates, Book 3 of the Rogue Gods Trilogy by Melinda Kucsera. Sit back and enjoy the mayhem.
Part 1, Chapter 1, What I Wished. When the light receded, Rand stood next to his uncle on the remaining section of the library floor. Darkness surrounded their island, but light shined down on them from the cluster of lumer crystals set in the ceiling high above them. So they were still under Mount Eredrin, but this wasn't where they were supposed to end up. I think something went wrong with my wish, because this isn't where I wanted to go, and that perplexed Rand. His wishes rarely went awry, so why did it happen this time? What was different?
I didn't think it was. So what now? We can't stay here until this area crumbles away.
Uncle Mirren glanced around for inspiration as he scowled. I can try wishing again, but do I try the same wish even though it didn't work the first time? That sounded silly to him. Why repeat something that didn't work the first time? This was a new problem, and Rand didn't like it at all. Light blossomed in the darkness to his right and grew as Rand stared at it. What's that? It can't be someone coming this way because the floor collapsed, and anyone coming toward us would need a floor to walk on unless they can fly. But I don't know anybody who can fly. Rand padded to the edge of their ragged island, still supported by the columns on the level below that were also still standing. He studied the growing light. Although Rosalie and Avarian both flew through a wall, so maybe that light is just them returning from wherever they went.
Don't you mean whenever they went?
Uncle Myron asked, but he didn't approach the edge since he didn't like heights all that much. Heights didn't bother Rand one bit, but he might have inherited his love of heights from his father, along with his green eyes, his dark hair, his facial features, and his tall stature. But not my personality or my magic. They're all mine. Rand waved away his uncle's comment because he didn't want to think about people traveling back in time and messing around with timelines, even though that was Rosalie's plan. I still think she's crazy. Her plan was frightening to think about, so he just put it out of his mind until she returned to tell him about it. While he wool gathered, the light grew until it was as tall and as wide as a person. Maybe Rosalie and Avarian would pop out of it. If they do, I'll need to catch them somehow, but my arms aren't long enough to reach that light from here. Well, he could wish for longer arms, but that might be painful. Or he could wish that his friends fell forward and flew across the gap between the light and the remaining section of the floor and landed at his feet where he could grab their hands. Yes, that should work perfectly. Satisfied that he now had a plan in mind, Rand reached into his pocket to pull out another lumer crystal to hold his wish and the energy to manifest it. But a silhouette appeared in the light, and he let the rock fall back into his pocket when the shadow jumped. Rand backed away so the shadow didn't slam into him, because he couldn't help anyone from the ground. The gray-clad person landed on the edge, but they weren't Rosalie or Ivarian. Their gray hood and robes reminded Rand of Papa's friend Shade. But Shade died when I was little.
Who are you?
Uncle Myron asked as Rand backed into him. The robed person pushed back their hood to reveal horns on their head and a scaly face that ended in mandibles like an insect. They studied Rand as their scaly skin flowed like wax and reshaped itself into a copy of his face. Hey, that's not fair. That's my face. You can't have that. Give it back. Rand shoved the creature hard in the chest and it fell backward into the darkness surrounding their island. The creature windmilled their arms as they plummeted into the deep hole, plunging into the earth.
You did the right thing, but I still want to know what that creature was.
Uncle Mirren squeezed his shoulder. Rand peered over the edge to make sure the demon was gone. Darkness met his gaze, but he kept searching in case the creature sprouted wings and returned to menace them again. I don't know what it is. I've never seen anything like it, but I'll bet that creature is some kind of demon since they had horns.
It was,
said someone else as another silhouette appeared in the light, still floating in the darkness.
Who are you? What do you want?
Uncle Myron stared into the light like if he glared hard enough, it would go away.
Thank you for getting rid of my supervisor. I don't mean any harm, and I don't want any trouble. I just want to find somewhere to hide this crystal where the adversary will never find it.
The person-shaped silhouette extended a gloved hand out of the light, and indeed a crystal sat on their gray-gloved hand. What kind of crystal is that? Because it looks like a Lumiere crystal. Rand couldn't tell anything other than that from 6 feet away.
It might be one, I don't know. I just know that the adversary wants us to collect all the time crystals and bring them back to him. If he wants them, then I don't want him to have them.
Who are you?
Uncle Mirren asked. But that wasn't as important as how the demon arrived here, and how did the light float like that? When Rand opened his mouth, a different question popped out, but it was no less important. Why don't you want him to have them?
If he wants something, then it's best not to let him have it because he won't do anything good with it. That's for sure. As for who I am, that's complicated. I'll just say that some angels screwed around with mortals way back at the dawn of time, and my kind resulted from that.
Can you also change your face? Rand glanced over the edge again, but there was no sign of the other demon.
Yes, I can change my whole body into whatever form I want. That's why the adversary sent my kind on this mission. But as I already said, I'm here to do the opposite of what he ordered. So, will you help me hide this crystal?
The demon held it out again. Sure, toss it to me, Rand shrugged. It was an odd request, but no odder than that time Rosalie asked him to wish she went back in time, like I would ever do such a thing.
Do you promise to keep it out of the adversary's hands? Because if you don't, then I failed, and that's not something I want to happen.
Yeah, he can't come here, and even if he did, I'd just kick his butt like my dad did back when I was a kid. I don't think the adversary would mess with me again. I'm much bigger, stronger, and far more magical now than when I was little. Since he couldn't get to me then, I don't think he can get to me at all now. Rand extended his hands to catch the crystal if the demon ever threw it.
He can't physically leave hell,
Uncle Mirren said, and that was true.
He keeps finding ways around that, and I really need to get back, because I'm trying to spread around the crystals he found before he returns. So here, take it somewhere one of my kind will never find it.
The silhouetted demon tossed the crystal. Rand caught it. The crystal looked like the one Rosalie had before she disappeared. I wonder if it's the same kind. Without Papa here to identify it, there was no way to tell.
Just promise me you won't let it fall into his hands.
The nice demon said as his hand withdrew into the light. Sure, I promise. Rand turned the crystal over on his palm.
What are your kind called? Are they all working against the adversary or just some?
Uncle Mirren stopped beside Rand and glanced at the crystal.
I suppose it can't hurt to tell you that. We're called Versati, and no, not all of us are working against the adversary. I wish we all were, but we all have to make our own decisions. I know some are working against him, but I don't know how many because we can't talk about it openly. Now, I really must go, and you should hide that crystal.
The silhouette faded from the light, but the light didn't go anywhere.
How do we know if we encounter one of your kind in the future if they're working for the adversary or against him?
Uncle Mirren asked, hopefully in time to get an answer.
You can't know that just by looking at someone. You'll have to judge them by their actions. If they attack you with this, then you can assume that they aren't on your side.
A gloved hand reached out of the light again and held a wicked-looking knife with a gray crystal on its hilt. The time crystal tried to fly toward it, but Rand closed his fist around it. How can that knife attract the time crystal?
I don't know, but the adversary gave us these blades to help us find them, so anyone with them is not on your side.
The glove hand retracted into the light, and the blade stopped pulling on the crystal.
Remember your promise. I'm counting on you to keep that crystal away from the adversary. Don't fail, or something bad will happen.
The light shrank until it winked out, leaving unbroken darkness behind. Well, that was weird. Rand tossed the time crystal from hand to hand.
Are you going to hide it?
Uncle Mirren pointed at the crystal in question. You ask that like you have something else in mind. What do you think we should do with it? Rand stepped away from the edge.
Well, you promised to hide it, so don't you need to do that?
Uncle Mirren followed him back to the middle of the island. No, promises aren't any more binding for me than they are for you. Rand examined the crystal.
Well, when you put it that way, I thought we could check on Rosalie and Invading. I have this bad feeling that something went wrong. They might need help.
Uncle Mirren rubbed his chest with the heel of his hand. That's true, but I don't want to travel back in time. I already ran into the younger version of Papa once already, and that was weird enough. I don't want to do that again, and I might if we go back in time. Rand didn't understand why Rosalie didn't care about running into a younger version of her mom.
Do you think we can go back? Would we use that time crystal?
Uncle Mirren tapped his index finger on it. Maybe. I don't know if I could wish us back in time. I've never tried that, but I've never wanted to either, and Rand still didn't want to.
Would you try it? I think they might be in big trouble, and we're just standing around, staring at darkness and waiting for the floor to collapse, when we could do something.
Uncle Mirren took the crystal from his hands. And you'll feel bad if we don't go. Rand folded his arms. Why did everything keep circling back to time travel? This is all your fault, Rosalie.
Won't you feel bad too?
Uncle Mirren turned the crystal over. Yeah, but I still don't like all this time travel business. Why can't I wish them back here? That sounded like a great idea. Rand rubbed his hands together, ready to get started on that.
Would that hurt them? After all, we don't know what their situation is.
Uncle Mirren held the crystal out to him. Rand walked away from it. I don't know, because he didn't know. He couldn't wish for that. Rand sighed because his uncle already knew that. You know me too well. Rand took the crystal from his uncle.
Well, I helped to raise you, so I should know you better than you know yourself.
Uncle Mirren smiled. Why didn't the idea of time travel bother him? All right, I'll wish us to go wherever they are, but if we run into a younger version of Papa, you're dealing with him, not me. After all, he's your brother and it'll be less weird for you. Rand glared at his uncle.
All right, I can agree with that. Let's go before the floor collapses. I really don't want to find out where the rest of the library went.
Okay. Rand tossed the time crystal into the air and thought of his friends. But he didn't know Ivarian well, so only an image of Rosalie sprang to mind. I wish to see her again so I can tell her how much I hate the very idea of time travel. Before the world whited out, he caught his uncle's hand to make sure the wish included him because he refused to go back in time alone. Hopefully, he wouldn't have to time travel at all. I really hope Rosalie was wrong about time being all messed up, but from everything he'd seen and experienced over the last few months, he knew she was right.
Chapter 2, Dragon Problems. Come on, you're an archangel. You can fly faster than a lightning bolt, Daniel told herself. The purely mental pep talk worked. She found the energy to flap her wings faster, and she extended both arms over her head and steepled her hands, so she cut through the fog like an arrow if arrows had golden halos and large white wings. The denizens of the Gray Between didn't like anyone to mess with their realm, so the elephantine creatures worked overtime to puff out enough fog to blanket their herd and hide everything, including the landmarks she needed to make sure she flew in the right direction. I hope I'm still flying west, because she couldn't tell anymore with the gray clouds above and the dense fog rising like it wanted to cover her too. Whose side are those elephants on? Probably not hers. Those ornery creatures needed to quit making her task harder than it needed to be. I'll do more than give them a piece of my mind if I don't reach help in time to save my friends. Thaniel scanned the fog for anything that might be a ridge or hill. Natalie and Argeniel counted on her to gather the angelic cavalry and bring it to them, but she'd settle for just Azrael if she couldn't find anyone else. That archangel could pack a wallop, and that's just what her friends needed right now. Pain stabbed her right between her breasts as an invisible hand punched her in the chest and sent her reeling for a moment. Daniel righted herself. Come on, shake it off and keep flying. The adversary only wins if you let him, so don't let him. She spread her wings and glided while she tried to throw off the disorientation. The pain spiked as a hard point pressed against her muscles. The adversary was trying to steal her time crystal. Damn it! I need that thing to stay where it is. And that motivated her to flap her wings faster as a rainbow arched down from the sky and dyed the top of a grassy hill poking out of the fog in every color that light came in. That's the mortal veil! I'm almost there! Daniel cheered in her head since she couldn't spare the breath to do it out loud. She gritted her teeth against the burning pain in her chest as the crystal strained to break free. With a desperate burst of speed, she shot over the hill, and the fog ended on the other side like someone cut it with a knife, revealing a sandy beach and the hammered metal of the sea that separated the Gray Between from the lowest level of heaven. Technically, more than water divided them, since the Gray Between was in a different realm from heaven, so anyone except an angel would find it difficult to reach heaven unless they were meant to, but that technicality didn't apply to angels. So Thaniel flew over the beach and the sea, growing lighter and brighter as she shed her physical body, and it faded away because she didn't need it anymore. After all, angels were made of spirit and light, and heaven was a place for the soul. The pain vanished, too. As she put more miles between her and the Gray Between, her time crystal settled back into its accustomed place where she could no longer feel it. A fireball flew past her face, interrupting a pleasant flight, and Thaniel veered to avoid a dragon rising out of the sea. The purple dragon spread its giant arms to block her path as water streamed from its jaws and back spikes.
What are you doing?
The dragon glared at her with burning violet eyes. I'm hurrying to get help. What does it look like I'm doing? Daniel tried to fly around the enormous beast, but the dragon spread her wings and she almost collided with one.
That's the wrong answer. You know the rules, and this is a no-fly zone.
The dragon plucked her out of the sky and raised her to eye level so she could glare at her. But this is an emergency. Surely you can make an exception just this once. Daniel planted her hands on her hips and glared back at the dragon from where she sat on the dragon's scaly hand.
No can do. Flying isn't allowed, and that rule went into effect after the last war, which you were around for, so you know why that rule exists.
The dragon glared harder at her and narrowed her purple eyes to slits. Maybe she thought she could stare her into compliance. So what? It's a silly rule. Daniel rose effortlessly, since she was just a spirit now, and stood on the dragon's palm so she could glare back at her.
Oh, really? Tell that to the angels who ceased to exist when they fell from the sky and shattered their bones.
The dragon closed her eyes and squeezed out a tear. That can't happen anymore. We don't have bones that can break when we're in heaven. We're just spirit and light now. Daniel swept a hand down her white robes that were more dress-like and belled out considerably more since they were illusory versions of the formal robes she used to trip over a lot in days gone by. Thankfully, working angels had shorter hemlines and the option of switching out the skirt for trousers, so they had one less trip hazard.
But that light can still snuff out. So no, I can't let you fly or swim across the sea. You'll have to wait for the boat to return like every other soul.
The dragon walked toward shore with her hand extended. Does she actually think I'll stay put for the entire walk? Apparently she did. But this is urgent. Can't you make an exception just this once? Thaniel walked up the dragon's arm, using her head-sized scales like stairs.
No, you'll have to wait on the beach for the boat to return. It'll be back in a while. Surely, your errand can wait a bit.
Nope, it really can't. When Thaniel reached the dragon's shoulder, she jumped and landed on the dragon's head. Thaniel gripped the dragon's horn and pushed on it until the dragon's head turned. She was probably trying to see her.
What are you doing?
The dragon stopped and tried to glare at her again, but her eye ridges made that impossible since Thaniel stood behind them. I'm turning you around because you're walking in the wrong direction. Thaniel glanced at the shore, then at the sea, and estimated the dragon's head pointed roughly in the direction she wanted to go. Forward, march! She flapped her wings and pushed on the horn, jerking the startled dragon hopefully toward the farther shore where heaven waited. Somewhere in the middle of that sea, the realm of the Gray-Between gave way to the realm of heaven. But Thaniel couldn't see the border between them from here, so she must not be close to it. Hold on, Arginil and Natali. I'm trying to get help as fast as I can. Thaniel reached down deep inside her and harnessed her inner strength for one almighty shove.
Get off my head and stop pushing on my horn before you knock me over. You're unfairly strong for an angel.
The dragon staggered a few steps, then ran to regain her balance, but she headed in the right direction at last. A silhouette of a boat appeared on the horizon like an answer to a prayer. Oh, thank God. I don't need to push this beast all the way to the other side just to that boat. Danielle grinned as she pushed on the horn again. Not until you take me to the boat. I don't have time to wait for it to come back now. Chop, chop. The sooner you start swimming, the sooner you can get rid of me.
Ouch. That horn is connected to my head, and it hurts when you push on it.
The dragon swiped at her with her claws retracted because she couldn't hurt her, not on heaven's doorstep. That was against the rules. Daniel flattened herself on the dragon's head, so her hand passed right over her. Sorry, I really don't want to hurt you, but you're not leaving me much of a choice. My friends are in deep trouble, and so are a lot of innocent people, and the help they need is over there. Daniel sat up and waved at the farther shore. It wasn't much closer.
I could just eat you. I always wondered if angels tasted like chicken.
It's the wings, right? You wouldn't wonder that if I didn't have wings. Daniel wrapped her arms around her knees and leaned against the dragon's eye ridge. She didn't want to hurt the dragon to get to heaven, and not just because the gates might not open for her if she did. The dragon was just doing her job, and she didn't deserve to suffer just because Thaniel was in an awful hurry. There must be another way to reach heaven. If there was, Thaniel couldn't think of it.
It might be. Shall we test the theory?
The dragon asked, but she must be joking. No, not unless you want to explain why you slowed me down long enough for the adversary to win. I'm sure the creator will want to hear all about that. Daniel hugged her knees. She was an angel of action, but even she must follow the rules.
What are you talking about? He's in hell. How can he win anything?
The dragon stopped. No, he's not in hell, and that's part of the problem. He's currently in the Gray-Between, doing things that are bad for all of creation, and I need help to stop him. So, will you ferry me over to the boat so I can get some angels to help me, or will you let him win? I don't have all eternity to debate this with you. Daniel hoped it wasn't already too late.
If you ride on my shoulder instead of my head, then I'll take you to the boat. I can't leave my post long enough to take you all the way to heaven, especially if what you say is true.
It is true. I'm an archangel. I don't lie. Danielle rose and hopped off the dragon's head. So what if she landed a little harder on the maddening creature's shoulder than necessary? She had some anger to burn off.
Thank you. Now, let's catch that boat. You better cling to me with all your might because we need speed right now.
The dragon's violet eyes sparkled, but so did her scales, and that was all the warning Thaniel got before the dragon shot out of the water and into the sky. Thaniel whooped with joy because flying was awesome no matter whose wings had the wind in them. Let's catch that boat. Onward. Thaniel gripped the dragon's shoulder ridges, even though it wouldn't hurt if she fell. Besides, falling was the least of her concerns right now. She feared failing her friends, and that fear clenched her in cold hands that dimmed some of her glow and snuffed out the exhilaration of clinging to a dragon, cutting through the air like a huge winged spear. I'm coming, Arginil and Natali, and I'll bring every angel I can grab. I won't fail you.
Chapter 3. An Offer and a Lady.
Free me, and you shall have vengeance,
A woman said as Ivarian blacked out. He clung to that promise when the world flickered back into view. Where am I? A gray fog covered him, and he peered through its tattered shreds at a gray sky. Vengeance. The word echoed in his mind. Every fiber of his being cried out for it, but not just vengeance for himself. Yes, he needed vengeance, but vengeance on who? Christina? His uncle? Ivarian squeezed his eyes closed, but it was no use. He couldn't banish the image of glowing white lines shooting out of his mother after she saw him. That future knowledge, forbidden to her, broke her just as it cracked the icy arrow of time, and he couldn't stop seeing that either. I destroyed the past. I didn't mean to, but I did it because I couldn't say no to Rosalie. I should have listened to Aunt Faye and stayed where I belong. The future and the present couldn't remain when their foundations cracked and broke apart, shattering just like Rosalie did when a fragment of green magic struck her in the head. That image replayed too. We failed. We didn't save the future. We damned it. Someone must pay for that too. Ivarian sat up, and that need for vengeance fired him up until he threw back his head and shouted a wordless cry for it. The fog swirled around a nearby spot as 7 women shimmered into existence before him. They stood in a ring, hands clasped but facing outward. Their eyes were as dark as their dresses, and they were all curiously transparent, like they were projecting their presence from somewhere else. 6 of the sisters faded until they were barely visible as the middle sister stepped forward, still holding her sister's hands. Who are you? Ivarian rose, because it wasn't polite to sit in their presence.
I'm one of the 7 truths. I govern actions, but that's not important right now. Do you really want vengeance?
She stared at him as if she were reading his mind, and her 6 translucent sisters peered over her squared shoulders. Since they were all beautiful, poised, and had that same aura of power that his aunt and the other ex-gods had, these 7 sisters were probably from the same fallen pantheon. I do want that. But he just couldn't decide who should pay for everything that was wrong in the time left to him. Ivarian dropped their assessing gazes. Why did you come?
Our mother is the goddess of vengeance. If you free her, then you shall have vengeance upon anyone you desire. Be they mortal or immortal, no one is immune to her power. She can call them to account for their actions against you.
The lead sister extended her hand, and there appeared a clear star-shaped crystal with green and red lights moving around inside.
Get the crystal, and we'll help you take vengeance on all your enemies.
This sounds like a story Mom told me about the old days when her pantheon ruled over mortals. Ivarian examined the image of the crystal, but this quest didn't sound hard. So where was the catch? Where is this crystal located?
It's in the Library of Forbidden Knowledge. We're not sure where it is exactly in that place, but we can help you find it once you're inside.
The lead sister clasped her sister's hand again, and the image vanished. It's in a library. What's it doing there? This sounded easier rather than harder the longer the sister spoke to him. Ivarian still didn't see the catch, but there must be something, or they would have already fetched this crystal.
The head librarian likes to collect powerful items, but he's not at the library right now.
The lead sister shrugged like that was important, and it probably wasn't. I fought demons, so one librarian won't give me much trouble, but that was with Rosalie, and pain stabbed his heart when he thought of her. Ivarian rubbed the spot. Where do I find this library?
I'll show you the way.
The lead sister turned and strode through the knee-high fog, and her transparent sisters winked out as they followed. What's your name? Ivarian hurried after her until pain slammed against his ribs. It felt like something moved inside him and a hard point bored into his hand when he shoved it under his tunic.
I'm Morgana. Hurry, we don't have much time.
Morgana staggered like something hit her from behind, but there was no one there except them and the thickening fog creeping up his body. Ivarian staggered after her. What's happening? It feels like something is trying to drill its way out of me. As he pushed against that hard point, yelling sounded in the distance.
I don't know, and I don't care, because it can't affect us where we're going. Hurry!
Morgana ran through the fog with her arms crossed over her chest, and she flickered like a guttering candle as she faded a little more with every step. Where are we going? Ivarian ran to keep up with her, but there was nothing here except fog and distant voices, and the lightning striking the ground far away and lighting up the fog. The pain eased as someone shouted something that sounded like a speech, but he couldn't make out the words. The lightning stopped too, and a shiver ran down his spine, but Ivarian set his jaw resolutely because he was no match for Pristina. But a goddess of vengeance with 7 daughters who were all full goddesses in their own right must be more than a match for that mad time goddess. The dust shifting around underfoot gave way to something that crunched. When the fog thinned, Ivarian gasped. He stood on layers of bones.
We're almost there, come on.
Morgana hiked her black skirt up and ran on, but she wasn't corporeal, so her bare feet didn't make a sound when they struck the bones. Ivarian grimaced at every crunch and cracking sound, but he followed her. Rosalie would want me to sick a more powerful goddess on Pristina, and that would have to suffice unless he could find the man whose magic killed Rosalie. Perhaps one of Morgana's sisters could tell him, since they were goddesses of truth. But he could look into that possibility after he got revenge on Pristina. Ivarian coughed as smoke wafted into his eyes. It seemed to come from a doorway that looked like it was on fire. Where does that lead?
It leads to hell, where the library of forbidden knowledge is. You must go through that door to find it, and get the crystal to free my mother.
Morgana pointed at the door-shaped column of smoke. You've got to be kidding. I can't go through there. Ivarian backed away as he coughed from the smoke, making his eyes sting and water.
Yes, you can, because you're only half mortal. Your demigod half will protect you long enough to get to the library, take the crystal, and go back through that door.
Morgana pointed at it. Up ahead, an elephant materialized from the gloom, and its trunk swayed as it trotted toward them. Ivarian froze as its massive head swiveled towards him, and intelligent eyes studied him, then dismissed him.
You do not belong in this place, half-breed,
said a deep, rumbling voice as the angry elephant approached them.
Leave this place. The grey between isn't for the living. Go home.
He's leaving right now.
Morgana reached for him, but he didn't need her help. The word home struck Ivarian like an arrow through the heart. He had no home anymore. His time was overrun with demons and eavesdropping mages who could just wish for something and make it so. He knew he was being unreasonable, but a powerful anger ignited at the thought of Ran back under Mount Eredrin, the master of his home. Ran was good-looking, fun-loving, and powerful, and he had a useful gift, unlike mine. Ivarian stared at his hands for a moment, then clenched them. All right, I'll go to hell and fetch that crystal. How do I find the library?
No, you need to go that way and walk through the Mortal Vale. That's how you go back to the Mortal Vale.
The elephant raised its trunk and pointed in the opposite direction, where the voices came from earlier.
I'll help you find it. After all, my name means Seeker of Truth.
Morgana curled her fingers in a come-hither gesture, but the look in her eyes was determined, not sultry.
No, you can't do that.
The elephant raised its trunk and trumpeted a call for help. In the distance, more lumbering shapes emerged from the fog edging the boneyard that surrounded the doorway to hell. Before the rest of the herd arrived, Ivarian clasped her hand and charged into the smoke and through the portal to hell hidden inside it. The stench of brimstone overwhelmed him as Ivarian tumbled through an orange sky. A rocky landscape spread out below, and strangely enough it included a city and an imposing fortress-like structure just outside the city. I'm half immortal, but I don't think that will save me from certain death when I crash land and break every bone in my body. I need to avoid that. But how? I can't fly. As Ivarian plummeted, the wind screamed past him, and he felt like screaming too. The wind screamed louder. Was it responding to him? How could it be? Ivarian windmilled his arms, and his hands tingled as he remembered his magic could do more than take him to the arrow of time. Could my magic save me? It was worth a try, and he had nothing to lose, so he willed the air currents around him to slow his fall. The wind shear increased, plastering his tunic and trousers to his body. I think it's working. Ivarian concentrated on that cold tingle in his hands, and the wind swirled around him, slowing his fall and angling it toward the glowing yellow dome over the fortress. One didn't shield unimportant things, so that fortress had something valuable inside it, and a library of forbidden knowledge sounded like something that should be under such powerful protections. Sweat poured down Ivarian's face as he fought to shift his trajectory, so he'd land closer to that fortress, but not inside the city. But he must not have slowed his fall enough, because he hit the sun-baked ground hard and stumbled a few steps to regain his balance. Then he glanced around. Morgana.
I'm here.
She appeared beside him, but she looked no more solid than she was in that gray place. Where were we before we came here? Ivarian breathed in the hot air for a moment as he took stock of himself. Nothing felt broken or sprained. Maybe he could walk off that landing.
We were in the gray between life and death.
Why was there an elephant in the gray between? Ivarian took an experimental step to prove he was okay.
That was a memory eater. We should go. I don't know how much time you can spend here, so let's not tarry. The library of forbidden knowledge is over there.
Morgana pointed at the fortress under the shield. How come I can see through you? Ivarian hoped that question didn't sound as rude out loud as it did in his head, but he needed to know.
I thought that was obvious. I'm trapped too. Hurry.
Morgana increased her pace until she ran ahead. Grimacing, Ivarian ran after. after her. At least the ground was flat. Too bad it was rocky. But he fixed his gaze on the library and headed for it as he wondered how to get past that shield. It looked impregnable. Maybe Morgana had a plan because he didn't. I hope she has a plan. He'd find out when he reached that glowing dome, because he had no breath to spare for questions as he chased her across the cracked plain.
Chapter 4, not the library again. When the light faded, darkness surrounded him again, but this time it wasn't all-encompassing. It was soft-edged because the moon shone down on him, and maybe Rand imagined it, but it looked like the moon smiled at him. Its face was kind of blotchy, like it had craters or something, but he probably imagined them too. Enchanted trees stood a good distance away, and they ringed the snowy clearing. Some trees stood in the middle of the clearing too, but there was no snow under them. Well, that's weird. At least the trees confirmed he was still in Shayari, but he could be anywhere in that country because enchanted trees covered most of it, except the few places that they didn't. But none of those places had a long boulder that kind of looked like an altar if you squinted at it, and someone drew a lot of symbols in the dirt around the big rock. "Where are we?" Rand asked no one in particular as he spotted the time crystal and picked it up. A golden violet glow to his left caught his eye as he pocketed the crystal, and he turned toward it. Uncle Mirren wouldn't know where they were since he arrived when Rand did, and his uncle stood to his right, getting his bearings. The gold light shined from a halo floating above a woman's head. Her eyes glowed violet, so that explained that. But not who she was. This woman definitely wasn't his aunt or any of the other angels he'd met through her. In fact, Rand was pretty sure he'd never seen her before he circled her. "Hey, do you know my Aunt Sovan? She's also an angel. And I know not all angels know each other, but she seems to know a lot of angels, so I wondered if you knew her." Rand dropped to his knees when he saw who lay across the angel's lap. "Why is Rosalie lying there bleeding? Shouldn't you do something about that? After all, you're an angel. Don't you have some kind of healing powers you could use on her?" He clasped Rosalie's cold hand and rubbed it to warm it. He didn't know if that would help, but it couldn't hurt. Doing something was always better than doing nothing, according to Papa, and he was usually right.
"Who are you?"
The tanned angel asked, but she didn't look away from Rosalie. Maybe she thought staring at her helped? Rand didn't really know much about angels other than his aunt because she liked to talk about her adventures, but he was pretty sure every angel had some kind of power. "I'm her friend. Who are you, and why is she bleeding? What happened?" Uncle Mirren rested a hand on his shoulder and leaned on him as he lowered himself to the ground to sit beside him.
"You're a mage. Can you heal her?"
The angel stared right through him, and it was unnerving. "I could try to help, but I'd have to be really careful about how I word the wish, so I don't do more harm than good, and I'd have to qualify it so that it doesn't go awry, because if I were to just wish that she doesn't die, then she still might die when the wish ends, since I can't maintain a wish forever. Do you see how complicated it can get?" Rand squeezed Rosalie's hand again, but he didn't reach into his pocket for a Lumiere crystal.
"Just do what you can. We must save her if we want to have any hope of stabilizing the timeline. So if you want to have a future, start wishing."
The angel clenched her fists.
"Wait a moment, that might not be a good idea,"
another woman said, and she sounded kind of familiar. Rand glanced around for her and finally saw a petite black woman wearing red armor that looked like it was made of large leather scales, kind of like the ones on a dragon's back. But that wasn't the only thing that made her look fierce. She fixed glowing red eyes on Rand, and again, a frisson went down his back as she looked through him. Why do people keep doing that? Rand shivered and hoped the warrior woman didn't want to fight him.
"Well, would that be a bad idea? He's brimming with magic."
The angel glared at the warrior woman now, and the warrior woman transferred her fiery gaze to the angel. Rand tried not to sag in relief. A white-haired man towered over the warrior woman. For some reason, he wore garish robes that someone embroidered all their ideas on without checking to see if they actually went together first. A white-haired woman lay across the warrior woman's lap. She and the man were pale, whereas the warrior woman was very dark-skinned, but all three had similar features. Were they related? "Who are you people?" Rand turned his head when a flash of bright green caught his eye and demanded his attention. "Oh no, I don't want to deal with that right now." He almost shot to his feet and bolted, but the man coming toward him with green eyes looked like the warrior woman and two people with her, but this man was very tan. Was he related to the other three?
"That's not important,"
the newcomer said. "Oh, yes it is. If you want me to help you, then you'd better explain who you all are and how my friend got stabbed in the chest. At least that's what it looked like happened to Rosalie, since there was a hole right between her breasts. Thankfully, her breast leaned away from the hole, so the ripped bodice of her dress hid them. Otherwise, he might have a lot of explaining to do if she woke up and saw him staring at the wound. Was it closing as he stared at it? Well, Rosalie had some weird magic of her own. Maybe she could heal herself. Now that I could wish for it, since it's a nice and contained wish that that's limited in duration. Rand reached into his pocket and pulled out a white rock.
What are you doing?
Uncle Mirren grabbed his hand. I figured out a wish that might help. Rand squeezed the rock and sent some magic into it. He didn't have to toss it around to charge it, but he liked to do that because it distracted folks and bought him time to go over the wording until he got it just right.
Let him do it. The future's just shifted, and this has the best chance of working,
said the warrior woman. That didn't convince Uncle Mirren, so he held Rand's hand.
What will you wish for?
I'll wish that Rosalie heals herself. She's got some magic, and it's already trying to help, so my wish will just encourage it to work faster. Rand tugged his hand free and bounced the rock on his palm as he repeated the wish in his mind and played with the wording. He needed to get it just right for this.
Are you sure that's a good idea?
Uncle Mirren studied him, but that wasn't necessary. Rand wasn't a closed book with big locks and a keep out sign like his father. No, Rand was an open book that welcomed all readers and never closed because he didn't want to hide anything. The warrior woman said it's a good idea, and I don't argue with people who have glowing eyes.
You argued with your dad and his eyes glowed.
Uncle Mirren folded his arms. Yeah, but he asked for it sometimes. Rand tossed the rock into the air, but he didn't send his wish out yet.
How do you know we can trust her opinion?
Uncle Mirren had a point there. Rand almost missed the rock, but he caught it at the last moment. What if Uncle Mirren was right and the warrior woman was lying to them? Well, I asked who everyone was and how they knew Rosalie, but no one answered. The hole in Rosalie's chest was definitely shrinking, but it was taking its sweet time about it.
Okay, fine. We'll do a quick round of introductions, then you do your thing.
The warrior woman glared at Rand until he nodded. I already told you who I am, so this is my uncle, Mirren. Rand waved to his uncle, and Uncle Mirren nodded.
Great. I'm Faye, the ex-goddess of the future, and that's how I know this will work.
The warrior woman glanced away from him finally.
This is my idiot brother, Heathaglir, the ex-god of history, and he somehow started this whole mess.
Faye pointed at the white-haired man in gaudy robes, and he scowled, but he didn't look at all repentant.
This is our sister, Istiana, the ex-goddess of the past, and she's dying because of our brother.
Faye hugged her sister, and a little more of the white-haired woman faded away.
And I'm their other brother, Genar, the ex-god of memory, but I assure you, I had nothing to do with what brought us all here today,
said the man with glowing green eyes. He was the only one dressed for the weather. And who's she? Rand shivered as he pointed at the angel. The damned wind cut through his green tunic and trousers. They were fine for wandering around under Mount Eredrin, but they weren't heavy enough to do much as the temperature dropped. The angel glared at him with glowing violet eyes as the wind blew her dark hair away from her tan face.
If you save her, then I'll tell you. So if you want to know my name, you'd better do something fast because she's dying.
Okay. You don't need to be so mean about it. After all, she's my friend. Rosalie's mom was scarier than this angel, since Robin knew where he lived. She also knew his dad, too. Rand checked his wish over for flaws, found none, and gave the rock one last charge before tossing it into the air. I wish Rosalie's magic would heal her and save her life right now. White light would have blinded Rand if he hadn't closed his eyes, but he did because he knew the flash was coming, since he overcharged the wish just in case Rosalie needed a magical boost. He caught her hand and squeezed it, and his uncle captured his other hand and squeezed that too. Come on, Rosalie. The rest is up to you. Don't leave me hanging here. Your friends aren't nice people.
You've been listening to Storm the Gates, Book 3 of the Rogue Gods Trilogy by Melinda Kucsera. Subscribe to the channel so you'll be notified when the next part publishes. The Rogue Gods Trilogy is available as an ebook and paperback, and now a full cast audiobook. Click the link in the description to order your copy. If you love the Rogue Gods Trilogy, then you'll love Melinda's other epic fantasy adventure books too. They're just as full of magic and mayhem and characters who will do anything to achieve their goals. Check them out at the link in the description, and while you're there, sign up for her newsletter so her characters can talk directly to you. Thank you for listening.